Like a trusted turnout jacket you've had for years, Flex 7 outer shell fabric delivers a perfectly broken-in feel on the very first wear. Flexible, comfortable, and powered with the strength of Enforce technology, Flex 7 outer shell fabric is made to move. To learn more, visit tenkatafabrics.com/flex7. Flex 7, powered by Enforce technology, only from Tenkata Protective Fabrics.
We are at the live podcast booth at FDIC, and it is brought to you by Firehouse Subs. We are recording a special episode of Fire Engineering Books in the Books podcast, and today I am joined by Phil Jost, retired from the Seattle Fire Department. So, Phil, thanks for being here, and thanks for being at FDIC.
Oh, thanks for having me. There's nothing like FDIC to get an opportunity to refill the batteries.
Absolutely. So a little bit about Phil. He's Deputy Chief retired, served in the Seattle Fire Department for 30 years. He worked in the training division as a lieutenant captain and deputy chief, where he designed and delivered training programs. He was Chief of the Year in 2013. Jost teaches classes on the art of reading smoke, tactical decision-making, instructor development, and air management. He is co-author of Air Management for the Fire Service. Was released by Fire Engineering in 2008, and he received the 2008 FDIC Tom Brennan Training Achievement Award. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in organizational leadership. He strives to create better instructors through teaching fire departments. You can get more information about him at ignitionpointtraining.com. And Phil, this is all about training here at FDIC, so no more appropriate subject than to talk a little bit about Instructor One. So why'd you decide to write this book?
Well, one of the things when I was looking at the Instructor One curriculums that were out there, is there's nothing that was specific to just the Instructor One. The person who wants to start teaching for their fire department, a lot of fire departments, Seattle included, if you want to be part of the teaching cadre for tech rescue or operations training or recruit training or any aspect of training in the Seattle Fire Department, Instructor One is required.
Right.
And I think that's a good requirement, because it at least has the people who want to teach classes have some skin in the game, and they demonstrate some effort to achieve at least that minimum level. So what I want to do is create a curriculum that meets the standards for Instructor One, without putting such a high bar that we're well beyond the Instructor One standard. NFPA created the standard. The elements of the standard are in there. They're good elements for somebody who has never taught a class. And that's who we're talking about, is somebody who just wants their first opportunity to teach, to give back to their organization or to their fire department, and to begin to develop the skill set required to be a good instructor.
Right. So what are some of the main differences between like 1, 2, and 3?
So one is essentially, if we look at lesson plans, right? A one, if they're going to teach a class, somebody should provide them a lesson plan. Now they may have to adjust the lesson plan. Something like, say the lesson plan for a state might include forcible entry tools. Let's say just Halligan and flathead axe, and the agency that this person works for doesn't have flathead axes, they have pickhead axes. Right. And so you'd have to adjust the lesson plan. And so there's just these different elements, 1 3/4 versus 1.5 inches. The lesson plan might say 1 3/4, but your organization has 1.5 inches. So there's this piece of it is to adjust these lesson plans, but somebody should provide you a lesson plan. The facility is going to be provided. The students are going to be provided. Certainly you have to do paperwork to make sure you log who's in the class and record scores and grade tests. But all the logistics is essentially provided, starting with the lesson plan.
Right. And so the standard that we're talking about here for the instructor is NFPA 1041. And just the other day I was doing a webcast with a guy, and he kept mentioning it. And the JPRs. And one of the questions that popped up in the chat was, can somebody tell me what a JPR is? So explain what the Talk a little bit about the NFPA 1041 standard and what a JPR is.
And so a JPR, job performance requirement, so that's what it means. And that's broken down into knowledge, skills, and abilities, right? So in the world of the Instructor One, it'll say given a lesson plan and a place to teach a class, the Instructor One demonstrates the ability to transmit information to students so that the students achieve understanding. Now that's specific to Instructor One, but you could look at like a Firefighter One JPR, which almost all firefighters are familiar with because they've been through them. So even if they don't understand them, what they're doing is a JPR, but it'll say, given a 24-foot ladder and a target building, the Firefighter One demonstrates the ability to put the ladder up, secure the halyard properly, and safely climb the ladder. Like that's the knowledge, skills, and abilities that perform the job performance requirement. And so in a testing process, you're going to test all of those in some way, shape, or form through both written and physical tests and evaluations on the training ground. So it's that combination in every NFPA standard for each section. So for Instructor One, there's Instructor 1, 2, and 3. So there's some that are specific only to being an Instructor One. And an Instructor One should be provided a lesson plan, and Instructor Two has to be able to create a lesson plan. Right.
So is 1041 strictly just instruction and instructor, or does it go into anything else?
No, it's definitely for the instructional side. So Instructor One is the person who's delivering the class. Mm-hmm. Instructor Two is essentially people who develop classes. And then Instructor 3 is essentially the training chief or the division director who's administering a training program. Okay. Right. And so those are 3 levels. And much like Firefighter 1, Firefighter 2, there's just certain breakdowns for certain at different levels of what you're going to do. So when I was teaching drill school, right, I'm essentially an Instructor One. There's a lesson plan available.
You're using somebody else's lesson.
Yeah. On this day, this is the things that you're going to teach. Mm-hmm. You're going to teach how to put up a 35, flat raise, beam raise, beam carry, all that sort of thing. When I was back there as a captain, I'm developing those lesson plans, making sure they're up to date. If there's any changes to the standard, if we change the equipment, all those sorts of things, I want to make sure that those lesson plans are created and they're usable by the Instructor Ones. And then when I was the deputy chief of training, I'm administering the program, right? How much budget do we have? How fast are we using it? Right. Do we have, just questions come up like, hey, we want, the lesson plan says we're going to force these doors, or I remember one specific example was that each person's supposed to cut a certain number of locks. Well, how many students do we have? How many locks is that? Do we have the budget to buy those locks, and have we in fact purchased them so that on the day of the training those locks are made available to the Instructor One? It's not the Instructor One's responsibility to go get the locks, right? Those locks should be there for them when it's time to cut them open.
So tell on myself, I'm sure you're in the same boat as me. I remember my Instructor 2 class, and one of the big things was you had to develop your own overheads. So we actually made slides, no PowerPoint back then, so we had to have our own overheads and put the overheads on the thing. But you could also buy the canned curriculum from one of the vendors, and you would go to the library and you'd pull out, hose, and there would be a little cardboard deal that would have all the hose overheads that went right down the line with all the JPRs and all the stuff from the book. So I remember printing those things on the clear film. So that was good times. Let's get into it. So you laid the book out basically following the standard and the JPR, so it makes sense. And folks, this book, I said it when it first came out, and I looked at it and I was like, wow, no fluff. I mean, it is this essential stuff. There's no story time. There's no wandering all over the place with a lot of different philosophical looks. This is down and dirty. It's almost like a clean grab or a dirty grab on RIT. This is the dirty grab for Instructor. It is exactly what you need to know to meet that standard. And why'd you keep it so short?
Well, maybe I don't talk enough. Although I'm sure there's people out there that would definitely disagree with that. Well, one was my goal in writing it was to say, look, to get the opportunity to be in front of a class, the standard is set by the NFPA. They're the ones who created the knowledge, skills, and ability required. And so if I start adding anything more than that, one, it makes the class more difficult for the person who wants that opportunity. And the other is like, it's not my job to correct the NFPA, right? They've determined there's a group of experts who looked at this thing and come to a consensus that these are the things you need to know to be in front of a class. And my goal, right, is to give people the opportunity to teach and understand that teaching is a skill set, just like forcing doors is a skill set, stretching hose is a skill set, and you have to practice the skill. Now, when you first start teaching, you're probably not going to be great at it, right? But if you practice and you review and you try hard and you get feedback and you do all the things that we do in the other skill sets that we're trying to develop, then you'll become a good instructor, and then you'll become a great instructor. And at least in my path is like, oh, well, now we want you to develop curriculum, right? And that's where literally where the air management ideas and the book came from is that myself and Mike and Casey and Steve, we're developing training for the Seattle Fire Department, and we started training on some of this stuff and said, hey, here's an area where we're deficient as an organization. Let's develop a training program to fill this goal. And then we say, hey, that's something that we believe works. We believe it's effective. We believe it'll make firefighters more safer on the fire ground, and we believe it will make them more effective in meeting the mission.
Right.
That's a message that we can then get to this level. But everybody has to start somewhere, and where you start is, I want to teach.
Right.
What do I have to do to teach? I have to be an instructor one to teach. Okay, let me get that instructor one done, whether it's at the state level or whoever's granting the certification as instructor one. And now the lesson management system, all the stuff to support the text is there for states to adopt or agencies to adopt to facilitate both in-person and online learning in combination to give your people who want to teach the opportunity as quickly and easily as possible, making sure that we pay attention and recognize the standard itself.
Right.
So we got to gig our buddy just a little bit since he's not here to defend himself. So there was 4 of you guys that wrote the air management book, right? So it was you,
Mike Galliano, Casey Phillips,
Casey,
and Steve Bernoco.
So you, Casey, and Steve wrote the air management book,
And it was about this big. Right there, if we can get a shot of that, it was about this big.
and then Mike Galliano came in and finished it off, and it turned into this. So you can thank Mike Galliano for all the extra words that are in the air management book. So he's slightly full of air. We love you, Mike. We love you.
He's
All
my
right,
brother.
Let's get into the book a little bit. Let's talk about the elements of a lesson plan. Here we are at FDIC. There's 45 classes going on right now around us. There's hands-on going out, and somewhere for those classes is a lesson plan. So,
Yeah, and all the instructors here, I mean, you're not going to, trust me, you're not going to teach a class one day and end up at FDIC the next day.
Hopefully
not. One of the things I think is the hallmark of the program here is that you have excellent instructors in every category you can think of, right? People who have spent the time not just to get an instructor one, but to develop curriculum, hone the curriculum, and hone their skill set in delivering the curriculum to a student body. But from a lesson plan perspective, usually I'll start, there's a list of components that are in the NFPA standard, and certainly in the book we talk about every single component. But there's a title, there's a level. So if you're teaching people to be a firefighter one, the lesson plan should say this lesson is for people who are going to be firefighter one. If they're going to be firefighter two, if they're going to be rope technician, right? Whatever the topic is and the level is, that should be included in the lesson plan. And certainly some things, like for firefighter 1 and 2, there's a lot of crossover. You know, stretching hose is ubiquitous, right? So but it's going to include a title and then the level that you're teaching, and then it's going to say, hey, here's the tools or equipment that you need, whether it's Halligan and flathead for a forcible entry class, or hose and nozzles for a hose class. Maybe you need a piece of training ground, right? So it's going to say, here's how much space you need to do this thing. Or if it's in a classroom environment, you know, for this class, you're going to need a projector. You're going to need a laptop computer that's got the lesson plan and PowerPoint loaded up. You're going to need visual aid number 6, 7, 8, and 9, which might be, let's say you're doing a lecture before a hands-on class. You have a Halligan there and say, this is a Halligan, right? Here's the pick, here's the adds, right? You're going to explain all of these things, and those should all be included in the lesson plan. Then the body of the lesson plan is going to have the learning objectives. Here's the thing that people should know at the end of this. Each of those is going to get supported by you know, various PowerPoint slides or talking points for a hands-on evolution, right? So it's in that sort of outline format, and somewhere in there should be a list of references. Whoever wrote the lesson plan hopefully drew on some source material, and I always recommend, especially if it's a new class, you should be reading the source material, right? If you're going to be in front of a group of students, you need to practice the lesson, practice the skills, not just walk through it in your mind, but I say in the book and in some of the articles in the magazines, like, actually set it up even at your house. You know, put the lesson plan on your TV and go through it and spend an hour talking through that thing, so you know how it's going to flow for you, where it's going to work for you, where you need some additional help or input. But you want all those elements of that lesson plan should be included. Now, they're not all included in every lesson plan, right? So what you want to make sure, if you're the instructor 3, right, if you're the one who's administering the program, you want to make sure that stuff is organized in a way that your instructor 1s can come in, find what they need, find the tools they need, and be facilitated in delivering the program.
Did they still put the what was it called? It was a method. Maybe it just said methodology. I remember you had to put that on there. And when I took the class, guys, it's been so long ago, one of the terms we used was psychomotor. You remember that? Psychomotor skills. Yeah. And I was like, that'd be a great name for a band, Psychomotor. So
that'd be a band Mikey'd love.
And that meant that you were actually going to do it. Right. You were actually going to build it or what have you. And I remember my lesson for Instructor 2 was hose loads. And we couldn't go out and do hose loads, so you had to come up with some way to do it. So I built a hose bed out of a shoebox and used webbing.
There you go.
That was my way that I could get the psychomotor.
You adapted the
part.
lesson plan.
Yeah. So I had to have the student come up, and then I'd show them, and then they had to actually make the folds. You think about that. We do that with shoring because it's a lot cheaper to build models and then go out and do the big thing a couple of times, but you can't afford for everybody to be able to build every single shore like that. So the lesson plan of great importance, and you know, sometimes simple is better. I've seen some that are really complex. It's kind of like, okay, the lesson plan isn't teaching the class. It's just telling us what's in the class and what to use. So let's talk a little bit about learning styles and why that's important and why it's in the book.
Yeah, the learning styles thing is, you know, personally, I know that if I do something, I'm gonna. That's my type of learning, right? It doesn't mean that I can't learn by reading or can't learn by lecture, right? So you have these different ways of learning. One is, you know, self-learning. There's more than just 3 styles. There's 3 styles in the book, but you're talking about learning by doing, or learning by lecture, or learning by reading is sort of the 3 kind of main ones that people talk about. But the reality is that nobody's a single type of learner.
Right.
And I think almost everybody learns best if they have multiple ways to learn a topic, right? So that's why a lot of times, you know, even before a hands-on, there's a demo, right? So first I might read about somebody doing it, then I see them doing it, and now I can do it myself with coaching and correction in the course of that time. And so one of the things I talk about in the book is understanding what these different learning styles are, but also recognizing that every student that I've ever met uses a combination of these learning styles. So as the instructor one, what you want to know is you want to be ready to deliver the material in these multiple ways seamlessly and sort of on a repetition basis, right? So that all of your students can hear the information or experience the information in a way that is best for them to learn. Because when you choose to step in front of a group as an instructor, you have a duty, right? So in the JPRs and the NFPA standards talks about this duty, right? The duty to provide these lessons to your student. And when you accept that responsibility, it comes with these other elements. And so understanding those elements is one thing, but then incorporating them into the actual lesson.
All right. So I always think about music and how easy it is to remember like the lyrics to a song or something after you've heard it a few times. But if you read something, like you read a chapter or even a couple of paragraphs, you don't remember that like you do a song. And so by using several different methods, you're tapping into different parts of the brain that cause different stimulus, and that's the way we remember. That music's got that special deal. And I've even seen, like some school teachers will use songs to help kids, remember certain things. We all learn the alphabet song,
right?
Of course. And can you even say the alphabet without thinking? Mm-hmm. And so as an instructor, you have to understand those things to be able to develop a full, well-rounded class where things are going to stick. You can't just get up there and read the PowerPoints or read the lesson. And there's nothing worse than the death by PowerPoint.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Just, you need to break it up and have some demos, even if it's something like we talked about, a little tabletop exercise, but get the different part of the brain engaged is super important for all learning, but definitely for adult learning. Let's talk about the 4-step communications process.
Yeah, so when we have to recognize in any time that we're trying to communicate, like right now, there's both a sender and a receiver, and then you have the message itself, and then there's the getting to the understanding. And so anytime you give a message, right, sending a message, there's all of this process that takes place in your brain that most of us and day in, day out don't really think about, right? So first I have to think of the idea. I have to formulate it into a way that I'm going to speak about it. I have to speak about it. And so now I'm transmitting it to you, right? Then you receive it. Then you're actually going to decode it into your own language. And then you're going to hopefully achieve understanding, or maybe even just identify something like, I'm not sure I understand that particular word, or this isn't making sense to me, in which case then you could ask me questions about it. But this understanding that it's not just I say it and you hear it. There's all of this mental work going on behind the scenes that we need to make sure, because as instructor one, what you want to achieve is understanding on the other level. So, often even now I'm teaching a class and I might pose a question to the student audience. And if after I have to give them a significant amount of wait time to make sure that they have time to process it, come up with an idea, self-check the idea, and then be willing to offer it to the class in a public setting.
Right.
And if I don't ask the question correctly, then they might be confused, and then I'm not going to get an answer. Or if every time I ask a question, I immediately answer it, now when they hear a question, they're going to quit formulating their own ideas.
Yep.
Right? And so there's understanding that when we're trying to communicate these ideas, we have to have some baseline understanding of how the human brain is working, not just for us while we're sending it, but also for those, or I should say, especially for those students that are receiving that message, and make sure that we're delivering it in a way that they understand it. Not in a way that we like to do it, but the way that they understand the topics or the ideas that you're responsible to teach in that setting.
Yeah. And if you're not getting questions while you're teaching, then you do need to pose questions because you don't have the feedback loop to know if they're even registering anything that you've said. And so that's always been one of my strategies is I throw a lot of questions out. And I didn't get that really from the standard or whatever. I got that from other instructors that were like mentors. Tom Brennan, who was the editor of Fire Engineering years ago and part of this conference for years, we would pick him up at the airport and take him places, or we would take him to the hot classes to see what was going on. And that guy would ask you questions from the time you pulled out of this loop up here until you got, and he was, you were intimidated almost because of who he was to answer. You're afraid to be embarrassed. But once you had the guts to actually throw something out, even if he didn't agree with you, then he would say, why do you say that? And then you explain yourself, and he goes, okay, I get it. He goes, I would have said this, but he goes, but your experiences are different than mine. You have different territory, and you responded to different structures and all. But my favorite one all the times, I said it the other night at the instructor meeting, he'd say, what's the most useless piece of equipment on the fire truck? I don't know. I said, the hose jacket. He goes, no, even that. He says, you can throw it over a leak, and it'll keep you from getting sprayed in the face. He goes, the 8-foot hook. And I'm like, okay, why? He goes, because it's too tall for an 8-foot ceiling and it's too short for a really high one. So I always love, and I love it. He would forget that he asked you, and he'd ask you again, and you could play. You'd be like, the 8-foot hook? Exactly. So I loved that man. He was something else.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So, boy, this one is a pet peeve of mine, and it's just like, it's so important. And it's one of the things that is most often overlooked by, I think, especially by the instructor one. Classroom positioning, setup, and AV, and making sure everything is working. I mean, right before we went on the air, we're like making sure the books aren't glaring. We're making sure the mics are working, but there is nothing worse than getting in a classroom and you got AV issues and the sound's horrible. So let's talk about classroom positioning and setup.
Yeah. So the setup. I mean, let's start with the setup. So when you're getting ready to teach a class, you have to understand what the goals and objectives of the class are, and you're trying to make sure that all of the students can see you. Now, in a classroom environment, you might say, "Oh, that's easy to do," and in fact, generally, it's pretty easy. But do you want straight desks? Do you want a little bit of angle? Are we going to do some group activity? So maybe we want to create a U so the students can see each other as much as they can see the instructor. But we take that positioning out onto the training ground and say, okay, how are you when you are positioning to do this forcible entry demonstration, are the students going to be able to see you? I've been in demonstrations where, I mean, when the instructor's demonstrating it, I'm looking at their back,
Right.
Because they're right-handed and they're doing it that way or whatever. It's like, hey, if they need to get that turned around, so you need to think through these things before the class starts. And not even here at FDIC, but here at FDIC, you have instructors who have hundreds, if not thousands, of repetitions of teaching. They're subject matter experts in their material, and one of the first things every single one of them does is come here and check their computer on the system that exists here to make sure that the interface, that everything works. I was teaching a class not very long ago, and for whatever reason, like it just wasn't working. Well, I've got a backup copy. Somebody else has a laptop. Let's load it on there. Let's see if it can work. And so I'm showing up early. I'm getting all that stuff squared away, and just making sure that once the ball drops, so to speak, this class can be successful. And in the end, that's your responsibility as the instructor to make sure all that stuff works. If your classroom session is if there's a lot of PowerPoint slides, you honestly should be able to teach without any of them.
Right.
Right? I mean, you should know that information well enough. Now, visual aids, like I use a lot of video in the art of reading smoke, right? I have to be able to show video to show volume, velocity, density, color. But I'm always keeping, one ace in my sleeve just in case my setup on this particular day doesn't work. And anybody who's instructed a lot has had these
absolutely.
situations occur, and has learned from experience why we say, hey, think about the setup, practice the setup, be there early, and make sure that when the students arrive, your goal is to be ready to go, so that you can, even as they come in the room, ideally you want to start engaging with them and finding out a little about them, and maybe what organization they're from, or how many years of service they have, because those are all parts of being the instructor, is to have a good understanding of the students that are in your class on any given event.
So let's say you got, typical training room, 30, 35 students. What setup do you like the best? Everybody has their favorite.
Yeah, I like the chevron.
That's my favorite. I didn't know you were going to throw that term. I love it because I can walk down the middle, I can engage, and if it's not the chevron, then maybe the U, but I love the chevrons.
Yeah, and I mean I think the U is really, really good if your goal as the instructor, and this is probably not a brand new instructor who's going to be facilitating this type of deal, but if the class that you're in is designed to have a lot of interaction between the students, then a U is ideal. And in that case, like if you're going to have a spot to sort of be out of the way, I'd say from a positioning perspective, you want to think about where that's going to be. It shouldn't be in the center of the classroom, right? You want to be off to the side, maybe even have a tall stool so that you can sort of get out of the way. Yep. And let them, right? But you're immediately available because one of the things that we talk about too in the book is positioning for if you have a student who's talking right in the middle, like if you start moving their direction and you start teaching like right next to them, they're gonna quit talking.
Right.
And then maybe if they do it again, you do it one more time, and then maybe you have a conversation with them at the next break and say, hey, I need. Is there something I'm not covering? Like right. First, you take it on yourself, but you're just addressing it. You're going to try to address it subtly, and then if you have to address it directly, you're going to do that off campus, so to speak, right? Just because that's the professional way to handle that. But that position, when we start to talk about positioning, it encompasses all those things, and even I like to, especially for beginning instructors, talk about 3 spots. There should be 3 spots. You shouldn't be moving constantly. You should. You can move from spot to spot, and you can occasionally go back to the back of the class, but you can't teach the class from the back. Right. So you want to have 2 or 3 spots where you sort of have a really good idea that everybody can see you. You're not in front of your projector, and that you can comfortably address the student body. And that's all. When you first start, you're going to have to think about those things. You're going to have to try them and go, yeah, that didn't really work for me. I want to try this next time. Certainly, as you gain experience, a lot of those things are then going to come naturally to you. And if you've been in a lot of classes, which most fire service people do go to a lot of classes, if you're thinking about being an instructor, just pay attention to some of the ways that the instructor does it and learn good and bad, right? Learn good and bad, what you think works as a student, because the other students are going to think the same of you.
Yeah. I had a mentor, instructor who always said, preparation, 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 and repetition is the mother of skill. And it is. I mean, the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it. And just tell you what, I love the chevron when it's mostly lecture and maybe you kind of come up a little bit and all. Where I used the U a lot was if it was on a piece of equipment, a thermal imager, an SCBA, because then I can see, especially like a recruit class and they're like disassembling parts, whatever, I can see who's doing what versus the chevron. They're blocked a little bit because you got the almost like stadium seating. You kind of got them staggered, but it's so funny. Of course, like the classrooms are set up here for us by the team, but the standard default is just straight rows of tables, maybe staggered chairs, but in most cases it's just straight on, no angled floor or whatever. So probably a very underutilized method because it takes some effort to get there early and change the arrangement.
Yeah,
and
and
I
then-
get there and people looking, I'm crazy. I'm slinging tables and looking at the lines, and I'm like, nope, that one's got to go. But I lie. People make fun of me even parking, like when we park cars at a place or whatever. I'm like, Chevron, we can get more cars in. So
Yeah, and I was just teaching Saturday up in Pennsylvania, artery and smoke class, and I got there and everything was great and it was set up great, and then they were surprised because they ended up with a bunch more students than they were anticipating. So like right before we started, it's like, hey, let's get more tables out, let's get more chairs out, let's rearrange, like everybody, and now everybody's helping, right? So it doesn't take long.
Right, it didn't take
But that just understanding understanding that the way that looks, the way that it functions, the way that you're going to interact with those people, that's your responsibility as an instructor. You go to like doing SCBA stuff, like with recruits. We might have 20 recruits in a group. Well, as they're getting set, we might even a lot of times we're doing that lecture on the apparatus floor,
right,
and they have the equipment right there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as the instructor, what you want to do is as they're getting set up, you want to make sure that you can see them all. And if you can't see, recruit Smith, just say, hey, Smith, move over 2 feet, and of course they're going to do it, right? But that's part of understanding that this skill set of positioning encompasses a lot of things within the instructor. One is just to understand what those minimums are, but what is a lot of the book is how those techniques can be used, at least in a few ways, to enhance your ability to deliver the information, control the classroom, address if there's inappropriate behavior, and be able to have line of sight with the students that you're teaching on that day, because that personal connection matters. I think it matters.
Oh, absolutely. So this one's an interesting one. We're going to talk about adapting a lesson plan. And one thing I've noticed about anything that has to adapt, you have to have a certain level of expertise in the subject to be able to adapt. And if you don't, then you're just a outline reader. You're not really an instructor.
Yeah.
So talk about adapting a lesson plan and maybe some examples.
Well, the easiest examples are stuff like we have different equipment than the lesson plan has, different size ladders or hose, or as we're looking at those are just like small adaptations. As you become a better instructor and as you know that material in a more significant way, like when I'm teaching the art of reading smoke, I know what all the learning objectives are for an 8-hour day. And if I'm showing if I'm doing the intro and somebody asks me a question and that happens to dovetail right into the thing that I normally cover at the end of the day, I'm just going to grab that whole section and just slide it in here right now, because I already have the audience is already interested in this topic. There's no reason for me to say, oh yeah, we'll talk about that later.
Right.
If I'm adaptable and the lesson plan's adaptable, I can just pull that section in. Right now, when we're talking about it, when the students are already interested in it, and now what I've done too, not only am I covering the things that they're interested in that are also part of the lesson plan and part of the learning objectives, is I've demonstrated to them that I'm interested in what they want, what they need. And so if I say, hey, does somebody else have an idea about something for the art of reading smoke? Somebody go, hey, I think, what about this thing? And I can go, oh yeah, we're going to talk about, hey, in fact, we normally talk about that later, but let's talk about that now. And you have to have enough subject matter expertise to be able to work a little bit on the fly. Now, when you first start, your lesson plans ideally they're going to be relatively simple.
Right.
You're going to stay mostly on track. But as you start to develop your skill set as an instructor, then you can say, hey, I want to look for opportunities to do this in a different order. Or you might even deliver the lesson plan a couple times. You go, Part C actually doesn't fit after Part B. It would fit between A and B better. I'm going to move it. I'm going to adapt. I'm going to move it over here because I think it'll have a better flow and produce better understanding for the students that are in any given class. right? So teaching is and I talk about this in the book too, teaching is an art, right? I mean, people spend their entire lives, their entire profession is how to be a great teacher. A great elementary school teacher is different than a great high school teacher, is different than a great a professor at a university, right? And the skill sets necessary. And we're, as fire service instructors, predominantly, it's our secondary thing. Our primary thing is to be a firefighter, right? Or, when I made deputy chief, my primary thing is to be an incident commander, right? My days of stretching hose on the fireground are over. Right? If I'm doing that, I'm not doing my job, right? And I need to do my job. I think in my world, I felt that was important. The same thing for instructors. As you move through your system, and if you want to be an instructor at FDIC, you're going to have to develop curriculum. You're going to have original ideas and create those into substantial elements and write articles about them and propose them and practice teaching them and see if there's interest in that subject. And can you deliver a message that people go, yeah, that's great. I agree with that, or I disagree with that, but I can make people engage with whatever my ideas are that I'm bringing to the table.
And that's one of the reasons we ask the questions we ask in the proposal process, which we ask, have you ever taught this before? And, some people don't think that's important. They may teach some classes or whatever, and then they write this class for FDIC, they say. No, this is a special class. It's like, well, we want you to have tried at least, and it doesn't matter what setting. Obviously, if you say I've taught at every conference under the sun, that gives us an idea. But you should have at least delivered it to your own crew, your own department, and taken that feedback and made. Nothing's perfect out of the gate, and so we're always a little suspect to those. This was specially designed for FDIC using a dynamic, multifaceted PowerPoint presentation that is engaging.
Are you talking about mine? Are you?
I don't know. Did we accept you this year?
And the other piece of this puzzle, I think, too, is understanding that you never, as an instructor, you just never quit learning. I mean, you look at, I started teaching swimming lessons when I was 16 years old. Right. And now I'm teaching FDIC when I'm 60 years old, and I've been here for over 20 years. But even during that process, right, I started at my own organization. I was able to get some opportunities to teach outside the organization. And then I started teaching FDIC based on the air management book and then the tactical decision-making class that we offered here at FDIC, 200 some people in the room all the time, all that sort of stuff. So even though I'm teaching at that level, when somebody like Dave Dodson, who created the art of reading smoke, when he says, "Hey, I'm gonna quit teaching so much on the road. Are you interested in teaching the subject?" Okay, you know what I do? I go back to my notes. I go out on the road teaching with Dave. I listen to his presentation from the mindset of being the instructor. And then I teach one section, then I teach another section, then Dave provides me feedback. And I go through this whole mentoring and training process to learn this new dynamic. And that was a subject that I'd seen Dave teach 8, 10, 12, 15 times. Right. And that's why I was using it even every day. But that's different than teaching it. And not only teaching it here at FDIC, which is it's a little intimidating. I mean, I've been doing it 20 years. It's still intimidating. But it's also that when a fire department has me come in, I want to make sure that I'm giving those students as much insight into how that can help them perform on the fire ground as I can in the amount of time. Somebody's going to give up their whole Saturday to be in my classroom. I take that's a commitment on their part, and I take that seriously. And all the instructors, I think that's one of the things that makes a great instructor is that you recognize that responsibility to the student.
So just because somebody's got a great social media presence, they make great memes and get 100,000 likes, doesn't mean they're qualified to teach at FDIC, right?
Yeah. I mean, if the other side is just because you're teaching at FDIC doesn't mean you'll be able to make good memes either.
Right. Exactly. All right. So this is one that's it often gets a little negative twinge of the little eye roll or something when, especially like, you know, you're a hands-on instructor, you like to get out there and show people what to do. But when we talk about computer-based learning, it's all like, that's not real training and all. But the reality is it's part of a system. And back to you said, we don't learn just one way. So let's talk a little bit about what is the value of computer-based learning?
I think the computer is a tool like any other tool, right? And so you can have everybody has experienced some sort of lesson online, or that their department requires that when you're doing it, you're just like, oh man, this is terrible. Well, that's not all online learning, right? I mean, my kids are in their 30s, and they learn. You know what they taught me? There's a ton of stuff I can learn from watching YouTube. Right? I mean, I did a whole remodel of my house that way, right? It's not because I have the skill set, but because I have a willingness to learn and try. And so if we just adapt that to our, like, you're not going to be able to stretch hose without stretching hose, but can you learn the basics of how to put it on your shoulder? Can somebody show you how to put it on their shoulder on a computer screen? Absolutely, they can. Now you're going to have to still learn, go do it, right? But not every day or every person has that opportunity, and so sometimes we sort of forget that not every fire department has a raft of subject matter experts immediately available to teach them on every topic that has to do with firefighting. I'm sure there's a volunteer new firefighter somewhere. I mean, I've had brand new firefighters who work in major municipal fire departments that are on 4-person staffing, and they either come to me after a class or hit me up on email or direct messaging or whatever for my social media presence. Like, yeah, my officer doesn't like to train very much. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, they don't have control over that.
Right.
But what they do have control over is their time. Is there a way they can leverage the opportunity from an LMS system, or buying a book that has online content or some other version at the individual level? And we can also do that at the state or the department level. And we say, hey, we want everybody in this organization to receive this training. There's a 2-hour physical component that we have to have you in the space. And there's a cost to that, and we have to recognize that means you're out of service, right. You're out of your district, you've got to travel. I mean, in the city of Seattle to get to the training center, I mean, sometimes that's a 45-minute to 1-hour drive either to get there or to get home. All of that is time that you're not in service in your district to provide this service to the citizens, right? And so if we can leverage some of that time to say, hey, go through these things, either individually or as a company, we want you to see these things go through this stuff through some sort of LMS system. Then as a company, we also want you to do these drills or these training or these exercises in your district, in service. We want you to do those first and become proficient at these things that we're going to show you on the video. Then when you come to the training division for the parts that we have to be together for, we're using that time to the maximum effectiveness, right, in order to meet the mission. And so we want to use all of these tools. And so like the Instructor One book has a really big online component. And what does that provide? It provides a state could adopt this curriculum. A lot of the learning can be self-directed, so we don't need to have people. I mean, there's all sorts of fire departments. I mean, I live in Idaho. Idaho or Wyoming, like, to get to the next big city might be a 3 or 4 hour drive. Mm-hmm. Well, I can't come there every Tuesday and Thursday from 6 to 9 p.m. Right. to do 40 hours of in-person Instructor One learning. I just can't. That person's not going to get their Instructor One, and so now their fire department's not going to get that training. And so can we leverage some of it so that they're doing a lot of it either by themselves or as a company or even as a battalion to make it so that when we are together and there's a piece of it that has to be done in person, that we've maximized the ability to leverage the opportunity of that time. And can we use that time to the most effectiveness? And so the learning management systems, some of them are terrible. I mean, I'm straight up. I've done plenty of online classes that I just was like trying to get through, but not only the stuff that we have here, but I do some tactics training online in 60 to 90 minute sessions with groups of officers, 16 company officers or 16 chief officers. I limit the number of people that are in the room. We have a lot of interaction, and what that does is I can get tactical solutions from people who are, northeast, southwest,
Right.
right, like. It's great. This last group that I did with company officers, like one of the company officers said, oh yeah, our city, we had that same problem with this decision because of liability. So the lawyer said, we can do this X, Y, and Z, and we wrote this policy. Well, 6 other lieutenants went, can you send me that policy?
Right.
And they never would have been exposed to that because they're never going to come. They're never each going to drive 12 hours to take a 90-minute session. Right. But they can do that either at the station or at their house, and they, it's live. But all of these things, right? All of these tools as an instructor and as a student are just, you should be looking at ways to leverage opportunity to learn and transmit messages as effectively as possible. Why? Because we have a mission. Right? We have a mission. And if they are in support of the mission, if they enhance the mission, if we can deliver that service just a little bit better or a little more consistency, or we can stay in our district for an extra half an hour a day, then we should be leveraging that opportunity to the maximum benefit of the citizens that we're sworn to serve and protect.
Yeah. And I think that the computer-based learning can get a bad rap in 2 ways. One, it's not good, obviously, and you can tell because it doesn't make sense or whatever. But I think more often than not, the reason it gets such a bad rap is departments abandon everything else and only use the computer-based training. And so everybody goes, we used to go to training. Now we got the computer-based training, but it's a piece of the puzzle. It's not a substitute for it doesn't answer all your questions. But man, it makes it so easy to be able to have consistency and deliver and test and make sure that your knowledge, and even here at FDIC, the UL boot camp is 16 hours. It's a 3-day class when they delivered it originally, but they put the first day in a package and we emailed it out to the people who registered, and there was an online training component that they did through UL FSRI before they even came here. Like you said, they're not all going to come in a day early to get that, and it worked perfectly. So it's a tool that we can use, and it's definitely something. And with our particular, we have our own LMS is fire engineering training, and you have a component of that with the Firefighter One that's in that system. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and so it just, what it does is it supports the book, and it supports the ability that the reason the book is there is so that people can get qualified as an Instructor One. So states can adopt that curriculum. That curriculum's available, and they can leverage that opportunity so that people still have to, one of the skills that you have to demonstrate is the ability to deliver a class, right? So given a lesson plan and so at some point those people are going to have to come together with a knowledgeable instructor who can say, hey, that was a good class, or here's the things that you hit well in that class, right. Here's the things you want to improve in that class, but at least you met the minimum standard. And when you go for that testing day or that day of that interactive experience that you're going to need to have, right? Because it's just the online is just one piece of the puzzle. Is you're given the opportunity for people to do that without having to be in the same room for the entire 16 or 24 hours. And so that's what how that LMS or the online component for the Instructor One book supports organizations who say, look, this book and this curriculum, it has no fluff. It meets the requirements. It delivers a package that our people, so we can get them from wanting to be in front of a class to being in front of the class at a high efficiency, at a relatively low cost. None of this stuff is ever going to be zero cost. But you mentioned like the boot camp. Well, maybe if we can do 2 days instead of 3, if I'm the fire department, I can send 3 people instead of 2. Right. And now I'm leveraging the same. I mean, I'm using the citizens' tax money. But I'm leveraging it because we have this online component, leveraging it to a better outcome for those same people. And so it's all part of, really. I think that there's just so much opportunity to learn and teach and think about the way that we do things. That if we're not taking, in my estimation, I want every opportunity. When I was on the job, I wanted every opportunity to get better as an incident commander. Why? Because there might be one time in my entire career as an incident commander that this little piece of expertise makes a difference. And on that day, I'm going to want to know that thing. On that day, I'm going to want to have that skill. And if I'm not growing, learning, developing, exercising, if I'm not doing those things, whether it's at the command level, at the company officer level, at the individual firefighter level, there's knowledge, skills, and ability. And you have to be working on all 3 of those components in order to be a craft. You want to be a craftsman?
Right.
Address the craft, address the knowledge, address the skill, address the ability, right? So that we can be good at all 3 of those components, which is a JPR. It's a job performance requirement.
And there's always a big difference between knowledge and understanding. And our goal as an instructor is to put it all together. So at the end, there's context and there's understanding, where to apply it, when to apply it. Well, Phil, this has been great. The book is Instructor 1. If you're interested in starting your journey as an instructor, this is a great place to start. If you're a fire academy or an agency that needs a program, it's written to the standard, and there's supplemental stuff with fire engineering training that can go with it to establish your program. If you're here at the show, both of these books, Air Management and Instructor 1, are available at the bookstore. But if you're not and you're seeing this, you can get the book at fireengineeringbooks.com. And it's been a pleasure, Phil. Thanks for being here. Looking forward to your class. And this is another one that is in the books.
Like a trusted turnout jacket you've had for years, Flex 7 outer shell fabric delivers a perfectly broken-in feel on the very first wear. Flexible, comfortable, and powered with the strength of Enforce technology, Flex 7 outer shell fabric is made to move. To learn more, visit tenkatafabrics.com/flex7. Flex 7, powered by Enforce technology, only from Tenkata Protective Fabrics.